How important the bracing is, in my opinion, not important at all. If you only rely on your intuition, I found it a lot more difficult to make progressions. In a way it was by chance, because I played guitar like since I was a kid, but I never played classical guitars and I wouldn't have a good guitar at home. So I didn't really know that guitars were still made by hand, and I thought every guitar was a factory guitar. So I played guitar and I studied economy, I started working, and then I got bored, and so I quit and I traveled around, and by chance I came to Granada. And I met a guitar maker, Mario Aracama, because he was living in the same small village that I was living at the time. And yeah, I had no idea that guitars were still made by an individual workshop. So I thought it could be fun. So that summer I went to work to Denmark, and in the public library they had every book about guitar making that ever was published. So I took them all out and I read them through the summer, and when I came back in winter I tried it. I bought all the tools, the basic guitar kit, and not a kit but individual woods, and I tried it and it clicked. I started making, I would go in the workshop and I wouldn't even know what time it was, and I said, yeah, I want to try this. So it wasn't, I didn't have a plan, but a plan in the way of a business plan, let's say. Like I had no idea how you sell guitars or whatever. But yeah, I started making a guitar with all the books and whatever was available in the internet back then. We're talking 2010, something like that. And yeah, I didn't even finish my first guitar. It was looking so terrible that it had so many mistakes that I never even made the bridge. And I started another one, and then I came to Granada. I started asking around in the workshops, and I made some more guitars, 2 or 3, and then I rented a very small workshop just around the corner from here. So yeah, I came down to Granada. I would start visiting Antonio Marin and Pepe Marin, and I started asking each particular step, and then I realized I was doing many things that a lot more complicated and they wouldn't work as well. So I started again from scratch, every single piece of the guitar. I learned how to make it properly, or at least the way that it is done here in Granada, and yeah, that made a big difference. It's like doing the things your own way, or doing them the way that has worked for them for more than 1,000 guitars, and also for the masters they learned from, who in turn also made thousands of guitars. So those techniques are proved to work, and that made a very difference, a big difference on the way I was making guitars. I don't make their guitar, I make my own, and of course through the years you have to find your own way and develop the things that work for you. Because for me what is interesting about guitars is that it's such a new instrument compared to violins or the rest of the string instruments. It's so new that it is still not defined. Like every piece you can make in a different way. And every maker in the end ends up with his own model of guitar, different dimensions, different shape, different angles, different geometry. So I find that you can learn techniques, you can learn the basics, not to make mistakes, but then you have to develop your own sound, and you have to be aware of what works for your particular style of making guitars. What my style is, I wouldn't be able to describe it, but what I do, or what I've been doing for years, is that I try to collect every piece of information I can get of the materials I'm working with. I make extensive measurements, mostly of the top material itself. I measure different flexibilities, density, tone production or frequencies, speed of sound of the particular piece, and I collect all that data, write it down, and try to make every batch of 6 guitars that I make at a time as similar as possible. And then when I finish, I pick the one I like the most and go back to the data and see what was different in that top that the other ones wouldn't have. And for the next batch of guitars, I try to start from there. The problem with this method, well, or the good part of this method, is that it's very empirical and it will allow you to make progressions. The difficult part of this method is that when you identify the properties you like in a particular piece of spruce, in this case, or cedar, is that you can prepare 10 more tops that look similar, but when you actually measure, they're not similar. Not at all, but there are always differences. And that's the problem of working with traditional guitars, and that the wood itself, being an organic material, has variations. It is very complicated to find similar pieces of wood. They look similar, but when you measure them, they're different. So it's frustrating in a way, and you have to work a lot to find wood with the properties that you want. But that is my method. The thing is, if we rely only on our intuition or our feel for a top, when choosing tops, let's say I have 10 different tops that have been joined together, that have been cut to shape and have been thicknessed down to whatever you can, to a uniform thickness to all of them, and you compare them just by hand or by feel or by tap tone, our senses can be very deceiving. Like they can play a trick on us, because if a top is really good and it was expensive and you really like how it looks, when you flex it, I feel that I'm tricking myself into feeling that it's actually stiff or not so stiff, but when you actually measure them and you collect data, then you realize it was not as good as the other one that was kind of ugly. So if you only rely on your intuition or your feeling for a top or how it flexes, I found it a lot more difficult to make progressions. What I want to do is make guitars as similar to each other as possible. Same material for back and sides, rosewood always. Only spruce or cedar, only classicals. And make them in the same conditions, same humidity level, same glue, same bracing, so that I can isolate all the variables and try to find what is different from one guitar to another, because there's always something different in it, and it is the material itself. So if when I finish 6 guitars and they're all similar and have been built in the same conditions, but one is especially good, then I can try to find what actually is making it better, and then build from that on. That's the approach. It's a very simple approach, but it's the one I have. Well, it's about not having too many things changing at once. If I used Tiricote back and sides and another one with Madagascar and another one with Brazilian and another one with Indian, I find it that in the end, if I'm comparing all of them, I don't know if it's because of the top was better or that particular material was reflecting the sound better. So I want to isolate all those changes and just focus on one, because there will still be differences, and that difference will be only in the top. So it will be easier for me to identify whether that top was stiffer in the edges or in the center, whether it had more flexibility lengthwise or cross grain, or it was more dense, or So all these variables, if I was using different scale lengths or materials for back and sides, I wouldn't be able to identify precisely if that was the cause for the guitar to be better. I want to isolate all the rest of the, isolate this variable and get rid of all the other things that can change. That's why I like making several guitars at once. Because it like we talked before, if I made one guitar and then another, the season would have an impact on it. But if I make the 6 of them at the same time, they will all be pretty much the same. And then I can compare just the tops. In my experience, it has an importance. The material for the back and sides is also important. Probably doesn't, well, what I feel is it doesn't really amplify the sound the way the top does. It's not vibrating and producing sound itself, but it is reflecting the sound, and it's adding or subtracting something from the sound. And in my experience, for me what works best is rosewood. The other ones, yeah, probably they don't work as well for me. So it does have an impact. The difference between Brazilian and Indian rosewood, for me, I do not appreciate that big of a difference, and I wouldn't be able to tell whether I prefer one or the other. I have made guitars that I like a lot in Indian and Brazilian, and I wouldn't be able to pinpoint or to point which one were always the best, if the Brazilian one or the Indian one. No, I don't have it that clear. So how important it is to be consistent. For me, it's the key for making a living on guitar making. Like working with an organic material like wood can be very frustrating because, as I said, the individual pieces of wood change a lot. They vary a lot one from another. So for me, the most important is to at least have a regular line of results. One can be outstanding and the other one can be not so good, but they always need to be at least at a certain level. You need to be able to control the materials you use and the work you do to at least achieve a minimum result, or more or less a regular result. And that makes that when someone wants to get a guitar and they ask advice, they will tell that you are able to make a guitar that works every time. Maybe some of them are extraordinary and some of them are just your normal level, but you should be able to be regular, to be consistent with the results. And it's not easy by any means, but that's what makes it fun as well. It's a challenge and it can be very frustrating, but it's also what makes it interesting. I mean, if we found a recipe that works every time, first of all, factories would make it cheaper, and second, we as makers probably we would get bored and lose interest. So it's what keeps us interested in the job, like always trying to figure out what works best and trying to make an evolution from that point. I do trust intuition, but I don't want it to be the only factor. I need to be backed up by empirical measurements. And yeah, as I explained, intuition can be deceiving. Like I've tested this. I've seen the top I really like, and I've tried it, and I thought it was really good. But when you measure it, it was not as good as some others that were looking uglier, let's say. So for me, and actually I've been getting better results for the last 4 or 5 years that I've been taking measurements, and I've been trying to back my decisions with data, not only intuition. But intuition is also important. Well, in a way it's something that I need to do in a way. Probably I'm a bit, what do you call it, obsessive, compulsive in this, not in my life. I'm not organized in my normal life. I'm not exactly meticulous, but when I started making guitars, I realized that it was complicated for me to live with mistakes. So from the beginning, of course, I was not able to do a guitar without mistakes, and I'm not able today. But from the beginning, I tried to get rid of the small mistakes that could be avoidable. And if I made them, I tried to find a way to fix them. And the same way goes with the assembly. Yeah, I get pretty worried and I invest a lot of time and some money as well in being able to reproduce the exact conditions for every guitar. Controlling humidity, controlling the wood, controlling the glue, the water I use. I like to have control, although we don't have control, but I try to have as much control as I can, because I feel it has an impact, and it applies throughout the guitar. It's not only the finish and the playability, but also the assembly. I feel it has an impact. But of course, I'm not saying it's necessary, and many great makers wouldn't care so much if the power fling is not matching exactly, or the center joint is not exactly symmetrical, and probably it doesn't matter. But for me, it's important because it's part of the whole process. I like to be able to control every detail that I can, because I know I'm going to be making mistakes, because you can't avoid. So at least if I try to minimize the number of mistakes that I make myself, the involuntary ones will not pile up with the ones I have also made, and I will have more control of what I'm doing. I think that it can, of course, the less things you try to control, the more differences you can then end up having in the finished guitar, and it will have an impact, definitely. Yeah, at least in my experience. Every single detail is important for me, like how big the tie block is, how high the strings are over the top, what's the angle you set the neck over the top, how do you glue your braces, are they exactly at the position they are, or they're a bit moved around because the glue was too thick, how are the tentalons designed, every single piece has importance, and again can be done in many different ways. Like if we move around Granada, we have so many makers, we will find probably that each maker makes the tail block of a different size. So I don't want to change all those things. I want them to be consistent from one guitar to another, so that I can concentrate on the effect that the wood has itself, apart from all the other components. Aesthetics, yeah, for me are important, because for me it's part of, I wouldn't feel like I'm doing an honest job if I'm not taking care of the small details that are within my control. If I can make the preference right and accurate and matching as they have to, then I do it. Because if I wasn't doing it, I would feel like I'm not doing my best for a guitar. I wouldn't feel honest doing the guitar. But that's just me. I'm not saying that the one that doesn't do it is not honest. It's just my way of understanding my job, and it's not comfortable to be like that, I can tell you. No, not really, because first of all, I don't have that much experience with the guitar scene of professional players. I've met quite a few, but I'm not moving around the festival, so I don't. What I'm trying to do is build upon what I've learned. So I've learned the techniques for building a traditional guitar, and then of course, as you keep working, you get input from the people that come and pick up the guitars, people sending you guitars to see what other people are doing, and then I try to get what I like about those guitars. and also, yeah, when I choose the best guitar out of the batch I do, it's based on also on the input I get from players that come over and play guitars for me, and they try to show me what they want. But I don't have in mind, or I didn't start with a model that I want to achieve. I didn't have like a dream sound or playability in my mind. I'm just trying to build upon what I have and on the experience and input that I get from the players. And what I do think is that as makers of traditional guitars, we have to focus first on the quality of the sound, on producing a guitar that has a beautiful sound. That's the first. And then some other characteristics like volume, projection, all that is also desirable but not essential. Like the essential for a traditional guitar is to have a beautiful tone and to be easy to play and get a good sound without too much effort, without having to work for the quality of sound. Then you can work for volume or dynamics, but you shouldn't be working extra just to get a good quality sound out of the guitar. That, in my experience, or in my opinion. Yeah, double tops are interesting. I'm very interested in the technology. Not for the extra volume or but for me it's about, I imagine that once you, it will allow you to get more consistent material for the top. I don't know how to make a double top, the material itself. But I can imagine that you can get more consistent material if you make the natural wood lose its properties and replace it with an organic material that is easier to copy one from another. So if I were able to use that technology, it would be for me to get more consistent materials from one to another and not having to prepare 20 tops to choose 2. Just to find 2 that meet the requirements I want to get. I can speak for myself and for the people that come over here. For me, when I try a guitar, first that it's alive, that it's responsive, that it has, of course, first of all, it needs to have a beautiful sound. The trebles need to be I say fat, but fat is not probably the right word, but they need to be juicy. They need to have I don't like thin trebles, and I don't like a thin sound. So the first is that it needs a good quality of the trebles and the basses. It needs to be responsive. It needs to be easy to play, and I mean not only the playability, but also that the sound, it doesn't make you work to bring the sound out of the guitar. It should come easily out. And also the wolf tones or dead notes are also important. In my experience, it's very difficult to make a guitar that is responsive and alive and, let's say, loud without any dead notes. Sometimes you can make it, but it's also, of course, desirable that there are not that many in the guitar, because it makes it easier to play the pieces if you don't have to be aware of which note is going to be short or explosive compared to some others. Yeah, frequencies are important. The main resonance of the box is also important, and you can play around with the guitar once it's finished and try to get rid of the bad notes of the guitar. I try to control that, but I don't let that guide me, or I don't put it as a main condition when I'm choosing the top or when I'm making the guitar. Because in my experience, if you focus too much on dead notes, you can end up with a bigger problem than a dead note. You can kill the whole sound or the whole tone of the guitar. So I can live with a note that is not perfect. I wouldn't be able to deliver a guitar that in general doesn't sound like I want it to. Yeah, Cedar and spruce is a big question. And I've been, I've been changing my opinion from cedar to spruce over the years. And I think it gets to a matter of taste. The important thing is that the maker is experienced with both. It's like when I'm asked to do a flamenco, I would like making flamencos, but I always say I have no idea what it's going to come out, because even if you have a strong foundation on guitar making, you always need the experience. You're always going to be wrong when you first try something, or the first 10 or 20 times you try something. You need to build an experience. So if the maker is experienced with both spruce and cedar, it comes to be a matter of taste of the player. Honestly, there's people that prefer cedar, prefer spruce, because it's like your favorite chocolate flavor. There's no vanilla is not better than chocolate, but some people prefer vanilla and some people prefer chocolate. For me, it's kind of similar. I've been changing through the years what I like the most, but mostly because for me it's what I can control better, or which quality I get better. And lately I really am not able to tell which I like the best. I'm getting good feedback from both, but I wouldn't be able to tell. I think it's really a matter of taste. What suits the player better, which sound suits the player better. So this is a top that it's finished, and I was about to use it some years ago, but it fell off and it made a little crack, so I have it here, just standing here. Maybe someday I'll use it, I don't know. So this is my basic bracing that I've been using for years now. It is very orthodox, it's very traditional. 5 braces, that it's very much the traditional school here. It's asymmetric, so one side is higher than the other, and it has a transverse reinforcement that is not as traditional, because older guitars like Torres never used this piece, but here in Granada it's commonly used. This one is lower than usual somehow. Some people make it Boucher style over the braces, but mine doesn't. And there's not much to it. It's a very traditional 5 braces system, and it's also not very relevant in my experience. You can make guitars with exactly the same bracing, the same height for the braces, for the reinforcement, and you can change, the sound can change a lot, because being such a light bracing, most of the actual sound comes from the material of the top itself, and how you glue it, and if there are tensions, what humidity you're gluing it with, and how the top itself works. So this is just, for me, this is intuition, this is not empirical, but for me this is just to compensate the torque of the bridge trying to collapse the top. This is just a reinforcement to prevent the top from collapsing, but the sound itself comes from the properties of the wood of the top, not from the bracing. But in any case, this is what I use for preventing the top from collapsing. So how important the bracing is, in my opinion, not important at all. in a way, oversimplifying the question, but at least in my experience I've been using the same bracing for 10 years now, and I've made guitars that I didn't like at all. And they had exactly the same bracing, same material, to the 10th of a millimeter height. So they were exactly the same, and the results vary incredibly. So that's the proof for me that the quality of the sound comes from the top itself, from selecting good material for the top itself, instead of actually playing around with the bracing. Yeah, I'm not saying it doesn't matter at all. Like, of course the bracing has an importance in which system you choose will determine how the guitar is, some properties. But what I'm saying is that you can use the same bracing and achieve very different results because it depends on what material you'll be using. Also, the lighter the bracing is, the less braces, the lower they are, the more important the top itself becomes. So the bracing is important, and of course great makers like Friedrich had different braces they would offer because they could offer two different styles of guitars. So it is important, but it's not essential in my opinion. The most important is choosing a pattern or a system you want to work with and learn how it works in relation to the material you use. It's essential to understand how the top has to be working with a particular bracing system. Oh yeah, the arc of the top is also really important, and there's a direct correlation in between the humidity. You actually glue this piece, the others as well, but mostly what you glue cross grain with how much doming you will end up getting. And in my opinion, you don't need a lot of doming for a guitar top. This one has a lot because it was glued some years ago, and it was glued in a pretty dry environment. And today it's not so dry, so it's getting quite a big dome. I don't use this doming anymore, but it is important. It's essential. What I did back in the day is gluing 3-4 tops at different, let's say 44, 45, 46, 47 degrees of humidity, and then leave them out on the same day and see how much doming they get. And so I could choose the one that I thought worked better. You know, the bracing in Cedar and spruce is pretty much the same, but for Cedar I make the braces a bit longer, so I have more control, especially in this dimension, because Cedar is usually softer in this dimension. So I give it a bit more support, because usually if you get a really soft top like that, in this dimension, you can end up with too much bass, and it can be a bit out of balance. So Cedar is a bit more control in this dimension than spruce. Yeah, being in Granada has been essential for me. First of all, because I wouldn't be making guitars if I wasn't here. Because I didn't even know that this trade still existed. But on the other hand, once I started, I was able to learn from the masters here. I got a lot of help from Antonio Marin, from José Plazuelo and José González, and other makers as well. You have better access to wood suppliers, because many of them come here and offer wood. You have better access to dealers that come and visit the masters, and they also come and visit you. And so I don't think I would be making guitars if I hadn't been here. So yeah, it played a very important role. Mira lo que te decía de las maderas, ves cómo se han movido. Ahora en primavera cambian muchísimo, no sé por qué, están muy inestables. Y sí que he observado que después del verano se quedan mucho más estables. Ahora ya se puede ver que cogen curvatura. Las tengo aquí desde esta mañana.
¿Y eso sería igual en las guitarras?
Claro, en las guitarras es el mismo fenómeno. En primavera, supongo que será solo aquí en Granada, las maderas están mucho más nerviosas y cogen más curva, menos curva. Sin embargo, en otoño ya no es tan apreciable.
¿Y de qué manera influye en la construcción eso?
Bueno, pues que si vas a montar en primavera tienes que ser más cuidadoso. Normalmente tienes que tener más control sobre la humedad si cabe en la habitación donde estés trabajando. Mientras que en otoño están más tranquilas, por alguna razón. No tengo claro por qué, la verdad, pero es muy observable.
¿Y entonces lo tomas en cuenta para construir?
Claro, si en primavera estoy justo montando una parte delicada, pues hay que ser especialmente cuidadoso. Bueno, yo tengo una habitación adecuada que está siempre a 50% de humedad, entre 46 y 50, y si estoy aquí fuera, pues antes de sacar las piezas fuera para trabajar, tengo que tener esta habitación también acondicionada.
Vale.
Vamos a hacerlo en español. Eso es la cosa. No lo sé, lo que tú quieras. A mí me da igual. Lo que a ti te vaya mejor. A mí me da lo mismo. Claro, depende, ¿no? Difícil.
Difícil, ¿a ti te da exactamente igual?
A mí me da lo mismo, Yo ya
vale,
pues
pues
al río.
vamos a hacer eso en español y ahora en inglés.